Hello again, it's Phil Croshaw here from Passions, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about those big cats again, this time with James Hanaway. Enjoy. Hello and a very warm welcome to Passions. And in today's episode, I'm delighted to be joined by James Hanaway. And James is going to tell us a little bit about his passion and what he's doing with his life at the moment. And hopefully you'll get some useful insight and inspiration from this. So James, a very warm welcome to Passions. And as I ask all my guests at the start, what's your passion?
Thanks so much, Phil, for having me on. Passions. I've probably got three ones that I would point out. First, family and friends, first and foremost around me. My little small nugget of a family, and a family that's across the world at the moment, and different places in the UK. And then theatre is a thing underlying everything. Where I've been in my life, I've always need to be on stage and have a microphone in my hand. Usually the photographs I have me on stage or a microphone. But I think probably my sort of major passion now, I'm working at the Big Cat Sanctuary as my job. And that's raising funds for cats and conservation around the globe. But my passion, I think, has been the fact that the work that I do has to be about making a difference and sort of helping people, helping animals, but doing something as I'm working day to day that actually has got some meaning and actually changes something fundamentally. So for me, that's my major passion in life.
Brilliant. So was there a point in time then when you realized that you wanted to be making a difference? You wanted to learn a living from the passion of making a difference rather than it being about getting the next big shiny car? Or was there a point in your career where you had the trappings and thought, blimey, is this it? Or have you always been like that?
I think for me, fundamentally, it started when I was young, so 17, 18, and I got my first sort of real job, I guess, and that was working out in London in the foreign exchange department of the Republic National Bank of New York, which sounds like, you know, the most fancy place. It was in the 80s. There was a lot of money around, and I ended up being what they call a control clerk, which is a crazy job that shouldn't exist then and doesn't exist now because we've got computers and everything that do everything that I used to do. So I used to match a big deal from the dealing room and print it off a dot matrix printer, if anyone can remember what that thing is in this day and age, and look at the both of them and go, yeah, they're okay, and file it. And I got paid cash in hand as I walked out on a Friday night by the cashier at the desk. 17, 18, had a hot load of money in my hand, and the guys in the dealing room would join me down at the Punch and Judy in Covent Garden. And there was one guy who was the main head dealer in the FX room upstairs. And after a big night out, as we used to have often in those days, he took me up to his office upstairs, and he had a corner office. It was right out of, red braces and everything else, and greed is good. And he showed me a wardrobe of all the suits that he had that were almost exactly the same. His little daybed down there, and he said to me, my job is gambling on figures. It's not even money, he said. It's just little electronic figures that go back and forth. And all I do is gamble on whether or not that's going to be bigger next day than it is today. And I've got this. I go out every night, and I drink champagne, and I've got women and cars and everything else. And then I come back, sleep here, put on my next suit, and and I'm ready for the next day, and I'm just gambling away all this money and making money, and that's it. And he said, "You try hard enough, young man, you could be exactly like me." And I looked at him, and he was 40 something, and he looked about 60 something. He'd done whatever drugs he could ever do, and he just told me that his basically his life was meaningless. It was gambling on meaningless numbers, making lots of money, spending it, getting drunk, coming back and doing exactly the same thing every single day. And for me, I looked at him and said, no, that's exactly what I don't want to do. I want to do the complete opposite. I want to make sure that every single day I'm doing something. I hope it's changed something and it's made a difference, and it's sort of fundamentally had an impact somewhere along the line, even if it's with the people or the animals that we've got here, or if it's out there somewhere globally, something we funded or done and helped out. And that for me switched my brain into that's what I need to do. I ended up actually running a pub down in Brighton. It's the first ever job after sort of getting out of university quite quickly, but eventually ended up with the Environment Council after that. And yeah, ever since then I've been working in the charity sector, and hopefully I've made a difference to a few people along the way.
Have you ever considered where that came from, James? Is it when you think about your family, when you think about the history of your family, do you think that whole nurture nature debate about whether it's part of you because of influences in your younger life, or whether it's just part of you because it's in your DNA? Have you ever considered that?
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I mean, I think it's probably a mixture of both. I'm a believer that there is a bit of nature. I think you gravitate towards what you want to do. I think my father, sort of liked to keep money to himself. Is very sort of careful about what he does. That was a reaction, I think, to his grandfather, who had a big business in engineering, sold it, and then spent all the money. And he's an Irish background, so my granddad was Irish, and I share the same name as him. And I think probably I've inherited that sort of trait. If I've got money coming in, it's going out pretty much as soon as it comes in, and I will share it generously and sort of do stuff with people. So I guess, I think there is. I think you do bounce back between what your parents have done. So I think that's given me my outward-facing gregarious personality, but that is probably right at the front of what people see from me. Underneath that, as a kid growing up, I had a lot of bullying going on, a lot of difficulties in that sense. So underneath all of that, there is a person that sort of is shyer than people think, and probably sort of still holds that little bit of sort of being the kid that's been bullied underneath it. But I deal with that by theatre-wise. I say one of my passions, being able to be another person on stage, and that for me is my release, I think. So my job will be here doing what I can do, but I think that's the release for me, is going on stage and sort of becoming another character and being able to push my emotions out through doing that.
And how important is the bit about being somebody else in that process? In other words, are you as happy on stage being you, or is it when you go on stage and you're somebody else that makes it significantly more comfortable?
Yeah, no, I think I'm happy being both. Being on stage, having a microphone, being me. I think I'm happy doing that. I guess it is what I use it for, which other people might be maybe sort of makes them scared, is being up in front of a big audience and saying, my wife would say she would never do that. She would hate being in front of a big audience with a microphone. I guess for me, I know I'm good at it. I know I can get up and talk to a large room of people. So having the microphone makes me comfortable. And I think that's different when I'm comparing or, auctioneering for the charities that I've done. I've always done that. That is me up there. And that's because, again, that's my passion. That brings out my passion for what I'm good with, the cause that I'm raising money for or telling people about. So the core of me is actually delivering that message out. So that is me at the heart of it when I'm comparing or auctioneering. When I'm acting, that allows me to explore other things. So day to day, emotions or people a person that I would never be. So, if that's why it's always great. And I think playing the baddie is one of the best things you can be, because it allows you to explore emotions that you would never have in life. And I'm a patient person that gives the time of day to everybody. So it's great when you can be playing a wife beater or a paedophile or someone like that. It's horrible. It's horrible, and it's the dark edge of your soul that you're digging into to get that character. But there's something fascinating about exploring bits that you would never have in your own personal life. So yeah, that's attractive, and it also it's a channel. It gets out all of that stuff as that character, and I tend to then be able to leave that behind once I've done it. You absorb, become that character for the run of the play that you're doing, but then you're able just to go, oh, that was good. I can leave that guy over there now, and never have to be him again. That's good. Move on, next one. So yeah, no, I think it's a bit of both in there.
I don't know whether you're familiar with the concept of clickbait, yes. Where where you've got a headline. I've got such a fantastic clickbait headline now for this interview, which is, and in quotation marks, I love playing the part of a paedophile or a wife beater. I think if that's not clickbait, I don't know what it is.
It's going to be, oh my God. Got to listen to that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was a joke. I won't do that.
No.
Yeah, but it's interesting this because I do think that the ability to be able to stand up in front of people and not necessarily not be nervous, but certainly be able to overcome that nervousness or that fear, I just think is a massive, massive, massive benefit in careers and in business. And I know in my business, I'm able to overcome that nervousness and get up and do talks and speeches and run events and things. And it's certainly helped me significantly because, interestingly, there's a very significant percentage of people who, what is it? There's some statistic, isn't there, where something like the fear of death is second and the fear of public speaking is first, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a big thing for a lot of people coming through, like you say, in their career, and it's sort of like you have, the immense knowledge of something, the skill, and things that I don't have, like being a surgeon or being a computer technician or whatever it may be, these amazing sort of skills and knowledge, but actually sort of, people go, put me up the ability to stand in front of a group of people and tell them about that particular skill that you've got. It's something that a lot of people just think is the worst thing in the world. You're right about being nervous. I think people tend to think if you can do that and they see you doing that they sort of think, well, you're just a person that doesn't get nervous or shy, or, you're sort of this person that can just get up and do everything. I'm really jealous of you. And I think you're right. I get nervous. Absolutely. And actually, but I like it and I use it. But that's the thing. I think like a director will say to you, use that emotion. But I think if you go on stage without being nervous or exciting, or you go up onto a podium and you're not nervous and excited, then your presentation is not going to be as good. Your performance is not going to be as good because it's the energy from that nervousness that you need to perform. But it is the trick is being able to harness it. I think for me, it's like knowing your lines. It's knowing your content and what you're talking about and being passionate about it. That's where it's actually natural. And I think, particularly as a fundraiser, I think that's why you need to be passionate about what you're doing. I've met fundraisers and people in the past that are jobbing fundraisers, if you like. So they're sort of trying to raise funds for a cause, but they're not really invested in the cause. They're being paid and they're professionals. And I think you can tell the difference when you truly believe in what you're doing and how it makes a difference. Then it comes across naturally. And if you know what you're saying and you can stand behind it, then people are going to listen to you and be more convinced if they follow you along to be part of your passion and support you and carry on giving you funds. So
I think that's a really good point, and I wouldn't mind exploring that a little bit actually, because and we're recording this at the beginning of March in 2021, so we're just coming. Hopefully, we're talking before we came on air with our fingers crossed everywhere that we'll be seeing some kind of the dawn, if you like, from the global pandemic. In terms of fundraising, it strikes me that fundraising seems to be a pretty difficult gig. And And is that a reasonable perception, first of all? And then I guess the second part of that question is, what do you think makes the difference between somebody who is very successful at fundraising and somebody maybe who's not quite so successful?
Yeah, two good sets of questions. I think it is fundraising has become more difficult. In that, I think it's probably you've go back 20 years or so, 30 years, and perhaps people had set ways of doing things. The British are very different from the Americans of how they give money to things. And I think, in Britain beforehand, you had a cause and you gave. You go back to the Victorians, they were philanthropists, but they had money and they felt they should give back to a society that had less than they had. But it was all very structured, and it was all very sort of, you would have the church that would support this. You would have, the royal family. You would have, landed gentry, and there was a nice structure of how that worked. And you were sort of required to do it, but you didn't shout about it. So you just did it. I think in America, it's become part of your social mobility, of how you climb. So in order to become the president of the United States, you have to have the right family, the right golf club, the right country club, and you also have to have a charity that you give to, and you have to tell people about it as well. So, and I think those models have mixed in together now, and in particular, something like Live Aid was a moment, I think. So the way that celebrities came together and pop celebrities came together to support charity was so totally different in this country and other places. So it then born the celebrity culture of supporting a charity and giving. So I think the face has changed and it's so much more complicated now. And you've then got big charities like Comic Relief and others that have then got corporates involved. And so now you've got you've got Tesco's and big companies that are doing multi-million pound donation schemes to charities that they adopt for the year. But the people that choose those charities are the same people that do their buying and selling. So they're hard-nosed, and you have to pitch and, commit to spending £1 million from your charity coffers in order to raise £7 million for them. So charity has become much more business-like in that sense. It's become much more commercial, and in this country, much more sort of celebrity and up, and using now even going into social media and everything else. It's become a completely different animal. There are so many more charities around that are after everybody's pound as well. And people are more canny about where their money goes to as well. That's the flip side of it. Because we've had a few, bad experiences of charities that have been, sort of not spending money well, high profile ones that, and the media in this country that are very good at pointing out mistakes that people make. So people are a bit more wary about how they give. So I think, yes, it's generally become more complicated and difficult. And in this year, you've then added a pandemic against it. But then it's a switcheroo on those. I think, yes, certain businesses have gone down. So it may be harder, I think, to work with people that have, that have lost money, that have lost businesses, and they can't support you in the same way. We can't have an event and having a big ball or a mass run or those sorts of things. But then you look at Captain Tom, and here's a guy that just did something that hit the right zeitgeist of the moment that everyone supported him, an old guy who walked around his garden and ends up raising 30 million quid for charity. So it's out there. But I think that the interesting thing, and the fact that I look at that, when you look at how you break that down, so you raise that phenomenal amount of money, but that was all, majority of that made up of £30, £20, £50 donations. The vast majority was from ordinary people who saw his plight and his struggle and his cause, and went, I attach myself to that and I can understand it and I believe in it. So I'm going to give him 30 quid. And it's probably a larger percentage of their income than it would be from someone with, who's a millionaire, billionaire sitting in a house somewhere. And I think that has held true across all fundraising. The less someone has, the more of larger percentage of what they got, they tend to give, because they tend to affiliate themselves with people that are struggling in other ways. So I think that definitely holds true.
I was going to say, actually, do you think it's possible to, I guess one of the holy grails of any fundraising scenario is to come up with something that just explodes. Do you think the majority of the time, do you think that the things that explode almost explode by accident rather than being some kind of designed program?
Yeah, I think social media, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that will tell you how social media works and how, I can get you so many likes on this and pay me some money and I'll make sure that you're the most liked channel on here, or do this or do that. I think a lot of people don't understand how it works because of these things. These things happen. You had it with the cartoon characters. You had it with the water ice bucket challenge. It's like they go viral for a reason that no one can really put their finger on. And so I think that does happen, and it's luck. But I do think there is, in most of those, you will find what it is that people just connect to the cause, the reason for it, and it's something that just connects at that moment as the right thing and an easy thing to do. We've had that. We've just had a fundraising here for the big cat sanctuary, and we were all in lockdown. We couldn't do events. We couldn't have people to come and stay over in a safari lodge and see the cats. Our corporate supporters was struggling as much as we were. So we went to an online campaign. Sort of, we didn't want to do necessarily a quiz or another thing, because I think everyone got a bit bored of Zooming with their friends and quizzing over the last year. But so it was winter and it was cold, and so we launched a cat care campaign that said, look, give us £5, £15, £20, and we can put a straw bed in with the cats, and we can give them some food, and we can keep them warm and cozy for the winter while we're not able to open. And it worked. It's sort of like everyone went, and for us, they identified with a particular cat. You could give it to the individual, and I think that's where it works, is when you know that the bit of money that you've given is actually going somewhere and having an impact, and that you can make it real for people, so they can see that actually their small donation, or whatever their donation is connected to an impact that's happening somewhere, whether that be with looking after our cats and keeping them healthy for a day, or you're sponsoring a school in Africa that's going to have a computer put into it, and that's going to give that child the chance to break free of a poverty cycle and become someone that can feed back into the world. So yeah, whichever it is, it's about making it real and tangible, and standing over. That's where your money's gone and how it's spent. So.
And looking at the modern age now, we there's this kind of, all of a sudden, what's come from nowhere. There's this new term called influencer. Is this something that, one, you're familiar with, and two, is this something that you think can be of benefit to something like the work that you do, to get somebody who's got 5 million viewers on Instagram to talk about their love of the big cat sanctuary? I get the distinct impression that it's a real thing, actually, as opposed to just a theoretical fluff. What do you think?
I think it is real. I mean, I think people they are influenced by people in the public eye. But again, people they trust, and I think that depending on whether or not that's Zoella, and because you trust that she's going to give you the best makeup, tip to make you look how you want to look. Or for us, you've only got to look at David Attenborough, who's probably the most influential. If you're talking about influencers on people that are, sort of interested in the environment and animals and the world that we live in, and what we can do to halt climate change. Here's a guy who's been on the most influential programs on TV, and bringing plastic into a real highlight of a single-use plastic. And then he goes onto Instagram, and bang, in a second, he's got millions and millions and millions and millions of followers, and they are hanging on his words, and they're listening to what he's saying in his videos. So yeah, I think absolutely, you only have to look at him, Stephen Fry, other people who, and someone like Jamie Oliver, who mentions in his recipe online, there's a particular product that he uses in one recipe, bang, sold out the supermarket the next day. So yeah, it's real, it works, and it's actionable. It actually, people will go out and act on what someone they believe and trust online has said. So yeah, it's definitely real, and you only have to look at the reverse of that. You got to look at Trump and how he could influence an entire nation, and he could influence his supporters. Going up to Capitol Hill and breaking in and stealing plinths and doing whatever else they wanted to do on there. So yeah, it's got a negative and a positive impact, and it's real and out there. But I think it's again comes down to the same reason that people would give to a charity. Is because they trust it and they believe what it's trying to do. So I think that's where the power of an influencer comes in, is that it's when people trust what they're saying and believe what they're doing, and they follow them. Absolutely.
And that links very much, doesn't it, to psychology? And I certainly recommend to all my clients, I'm a business consultant by trade, and I recommend all my clients read a book by Robert Cialdini, which is called something like The Power and Science of Influence. Do you think that understanding psychology is a key part of that process nowadays?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's changed over the years. I think it's like, and I think media and social media has just quickened up, and technology has just sort of quickened the pace of how people feel and change and what they use and how they interact with each other. So I think it's constant. You've got to be on top of that, about how the communication channels have changed and how you talk to people. So I think the psychology of that and the barriers that it brings up, but also the freedom that it gives on the other side, it's a total changing field. But I think fundamentally underneath it all, we're still human beings. And I think sometimes we've forgotten that. And where I found true connections with friends, with family, with the work that I do, is where I've had a one-to-one connection with a human being, and that's still the most powerful thing you can do. And psychologically, that's why we're lucky here. We've got the Big Cat Sanctuary. We've got cats that we can show people, and I think the huge difference of talking to someone on a Zoom camera about the amazing tigers and lions and little rusty spotted cats that we have here. Yeah, they can get behind you and you're not going to be passionate about that. But the difference of when they come here and they end up feeding a piece of chicken to an 8-foot tall lion who's opening his mouth right next to you behind a piece of wire, there's nothing in the world that gives you much more of an impact than that. And that person can go away and then, they can become a true supporter. Because they've emotionally changed because of that moment and that interaction they've had with that animal, and that gives them a passion again to see that his wild cousins aren't wiped out from the planet in Africa. So yeah, it's really important in the work that I do, and I think generally for people to have that, and even so much more so in this year. We've lost that human and sort of physical connection with a lot of people. So it's going to be difficult it's going to be awkward to begin with. The hugging thing is going to be a thing. Do you not? Do I want to? And yeah, so it's going to be a roadmap like the one we've got, but it's going to be about feeling your way through who's been damaged by this along the way psychologically by being indoors and not having that interaction, who actually likes it quite a lot and doesn't want to change it coming out of lockdown. So yeah, there's a lot of navigation as the world opens up, I think, around all of this, and it's going to impact how we work with people and how we interact with people. And I'd love to explore that through theatre as well. Off the back of it, it would be really interesting to see all of our creative people coming up with new ways of projecting those emotions and that psychology onto stage and through there. One of my favourites during lockdown was the guys, Mr. Sheen, when they did their Zoom chat. I think that was amazing, and it really sort of got into the psychology of being stuck indoors and at home, but being actors and wanting a release of some sort, but it just not quite being enough. So,
do you think the online stuff and particularly obviously online video as much as anything else, do you think that now will have a place in the communication process and the communication strategies that you develop in your work? Do you think it's now cemented its place I think it's fair to say it won't replace it, as you've kind of intimated a minute ago, with everybody wants to still, I was going to say, hug the lion. That might be a bit of a stretch.
No, just to be clear, no hugging of lions.
You don't get to hug a lion if you come to the big cat. Sorry to disappoint anybody.
And that it's totally part of what we would advocate never ever doing in your life. So we battled against Tiger King being the most popular in lockdown, and sort of really wanting to say that's not how you look after animals in captivity. I think it will. I think it's going to stay. I think it was on the rise anyway. I think people were using Facebook and going live, and people wanting to see virtual stuff. I think it's moved it on this year. It's forced people to go online on Zoom calls and have meetings on Zoom. But I think the positive impact of that is going to be less travel, less commuting. People realize they can actually do a hell of a lot of their job, at home, and, through connecting to someone in the States or across the planet without having to fly all those miles and pollute the air. So I think it's got a real positive impact. We are certainly doing Facebook Live sort of recordings here from the sanctuary while we're in lockdown, and showing people the animals and talking about what we're doing, and that's going to continue, absolutely. And I think, like most things, we'll end up with a blend of it, and I think that'll be the same with people's working lives. You'll end up with a lot of people going into the office sort of, maybe once a week, maybe 2-3 times a month, but actually, companies looking at the big office they've got in London and saying, why the hell are we paying a huge amount of rent for that place when these guys have worked for the last year at home and probably made them more money, cost them less. Let's get a smaller office and have it in Manchester rather than London. And, so it's going to fundamentally change the way people work and live. And online is definitely going to stay as part of it. I just think that, again, going back to psychology and for people, the dangers of that is, I think that's fine if you've got a house where you can have an office or a studio in the back garden or in the spare room that you've got. But if you're a young person coming out of university and your first house is a small bedsit somewhere, and your work is just there and that's it, and you're on your computer and you're not interacting with people, you're going to miss out. You're going to find yourself enclosed, and it's going to be very difficult for you to get out of that pattern. And plus, I do think, the sort of the stuff that happens around the lunchroom and the water fountain and whatever else it is, those human interactions where you're not in a business meeting, and people act very differently in a business meeting than they do when they're having lunch or a drink after work. It's if we lose that, then we lose the human end of how we interact with each other. And I think it's really important to keep up with.
Oh, yeah, I think that's absolutely fantastic. Okay, well, finally then, just put you on the spot a little bit. You talked about some of your passions there. Are there any passions that you've got that you can admit in public that are your guilty passions? And we've not rehearsed this, I know. Is there anything that you would say is your guilty passion?
My guilty passion? Oh, gosh. There's probably lots of guilty passions that Spencer and I have had over the years that we cannot talk about on a recording like this.
That's another show, James.
That's another show. That's another show. Yeah, that we won't go into. It's an interesting question. I guess, do you know what? I'm probably a trash TV addict at late night. I think that's probably me. And it's not necessarily any one particular. I find I've always, from when I worked in the pub, we used to finish late and the brain would be ticking. So, we'd usually have a drink after and actually a cheese sandwich, which is probably the worst thing ever to drink and eat before you go to bed. But yeah, my mind was still buzzing, and I think I've retained that. I'm not a morning person. I'm an evening person. But we'll be up, finish work, whatever we're doing, and my wife Catherine will go to bed. She's a morning person, not an evening person. So yeah, I'll find myself there of a night time, and particularly at the moment, if you can't find a decent program to watch, I will end up flicking through trash TV and getting hooked on something that I really shouldn't be watching because it's awful. But maybe it gives me a background, a misery background of that's the worst thing ever I've seen on TV. And I guess those are the moments I can't reclaim, when I've watched half an hour's worth of something that I think, why did I watch that? I cannot reclaim that half an hour of watching a terrible TV program.
Well, seeing as you've been candid enough to admit that, one of my guilty pleasures, I've not watched it for a while, but at the time, one of my guilty pleasures was Sex and the City.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
So you're in good company. And it's interesting that, though, isn't it? How I enjoyed Sex and the City, right, as a program series, but admitting it to yourself, never mind to everybody else.
Well, it's difficult because it is
tricky.
It's sort of like
it's tricky, isn't it?
You've sat there on the sofa and you've watched that program, and as you say, you've enjoyed it as well. That's the hard thing to get through. So it hasn't enriched you in any way, culturally or knowledgeably, like a worthy documentary or an amazing Oscar-winning film, but.
And it's certainly not enhanced my professional profile in my business consultancy business.
So it's not going on your CV, that one, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. James, thanks very much for joining me today. I know we only just touched the surface, really, of some of the stuff that you're doing and some of the work that you're doing, but I think some really interesting insights in that. And I think, obviously, what you're doing, particularly with the Big Cat Sanctuary, I would encourage people to check it out. It's a wonderful area and a wonderful place, and go and visit it if you can. It's absolutely fantastic. How do people find out about it? Have you got a website or a Facebook page?
Yeah, that's the best way. Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure chatting with you and sort of, as you say, talking through some of the passions that we have. But if people do want to get involved and be here, they go to the bigcatsanctuary.org, and you can find everything about us on there. And in particular, sort of supporting the animals that we've got here. But for me, it's the conservation work underneath that we're our partners that we're funding out in Costa Rica, Africa, Russia, Sri Lanka, India, wherever it might be. That's the thing that we're really, this year we hope we can carry on, keep going, but also raise more funds so we can keep on supporting what those guys are doing, out on the ground. That's important to me.
Well, the best of luck with it. I do wish you all the best, and I hope that you get open soon and you can start to welcome people back in and give them the enjoyable experience of walking around and not hugging the big cats, but looking at the big cats.
Yeah, no, thanks, Phil. Yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed, like everyone we've got a positivity, has to be, for 2021. That we'll be open, out, and hugging everybody apart from the cats. And we hope that people will come and join us here sometime soon. Thanks so much.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Take care. See you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.